All right. Well, good morning, everybody. We are very grateful that you've chosen to be with us this morning. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our continuing webinar series, the Learning with Leverage topics. Just as a reminder, twice a month, Leverage is going to be hosting these webinars that discuss various subjects that the credit unions tackle each and every day. And today, we're here to talk about ATMs, the threats that are facing them, and the successful countermeasures that you can utilize to protect against those threats. Now, my name as your host is Kyle Fowler, and I am the Vice President of Member Alliances. And my day jobs, that's plural, as we all know in credit union land, they include overseeing and managing our Members Core Alliance company, which is a core processing company and back office collaboration solutions, and the Members ATM Alliance company, which provides a full suite of managed services for ATMs. Now, I've been doing this for a pretty good while now, and just recently I hit my 20-year anniversary, and that was about a week ago that I've been working with credit unions. A little bit about me is I love spending time with my wife, my 3 boys. As we travel around, we go on all sorts of adventures together. And I'll just give you one small fact about me, and then I'm going to introduce Paul. But I've driven to the most northern point in the United States that you can drive, and to the most southern point as well. That's Key West and Dead Horse up in Prudhoe Bay, for those interested. And, on my bucket list, I'm working to finish visiting all 50 states. Still got the Northeast corner and Hawaii left to do. So enough about me, though. It's with humble pleasure and very deep gratitude that I get to introduce a friend of mine, Mr. Paul Gooch. Paul has been in the ATM industry for over 36 years now, starting back in 1986 as an ATM and branch automation service technician with Mellon Bank Field Service. After a few years of doing that, Paul moved into the technical support team and started training ATM service technicians for Mellon Field Services. Now, back in '95, Paul moved from the hardware service infrastructure into the transaction and processing side of the business for Alon Financial Services at that point. And then after a few years as a subject matter expert, Paul became the ATM device support team manager in 2002. And his team was responsible for Tier 3 technical support, along with code development and ATM certification efforts for the entire Alon network. Finally, after doing that for a while, in 2012, Paul hung up his management duties and he became a solutions consultant for the Alon sales and support team with a focus on ATM acquiring. And that's how I met him. In this capacity, he offered support to the sales, relationship management, clients, and product development teams with his knowledge of ATMs and ATM industry. Back in November 2018, Fiserv acquired Alon Financial Services, and Paul continues in the same capacity today for Fiserv. So, welcome, Paul. We're here to talk about the ATMs and threat security measures. I'm going to kick it over to you.
Thanks. Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. Just one side comment. Even though I've been doing this 36 years, on my 37th now, and Kyle's heard me say this before, nobody knows everything. You learn something new every day, and trust me, I do every day. So anybody that tells you they know everything, they're lying to you. Get their business card, because I want to have lunch with them. So, all right, Kyle, let's go ahead and move on.
All right.
So Kyle's asked me to talk to you guys today about ATM security and the attack vectors that we're seeing in the industry today, and what mitigation steps that you should be taking to help try to prevent or mitigate those attacks. ATM security is real. Hopefully you are paying close attention to it, and you are taking some of the actions, if not all the actions we're going to talk about in the next half hour, 45 minutes. If anybody has questions at the end, feel free to ask. If you want to reach out to me personally, Kyle can provide you my personal contact information so we can have an offline discussion if you choose to do so. But there's a lot of companies out there that will offer these services that we're going to talk about today. If your credit union or financial institution's you don't think it's savvy enough or ready to take on these internal battles yourself, you can outsource this work to a third-party solution, or if you, again, take it in-house, that's fine too. And not do a sales pitch, but Fiserv does offer these services to clients out there that want to have their ATMs protected. So if you look at the overall picture of securing an ATM, it's really a three-phased approach. The first phase I want to touch on briefly is the network that connects the ATM from the ATM itself back to whoever your ATM driving provider is, whether it's Fiserv, FIS, Cardtronics, whoever, Co-op, whoever it is. And it's imperative that that network is secure, preferably on some kind of VPN or virtual private network, and all the firewall rules and intrusion protection and everything's in place to prevent an attack into that network. Because once they get into the network, it's carte blanche. They can pretty much try to get into anything else they want, including into your ATMs, including into your card management systems, whatever the case might be. So getting them out of the network and preventing them from being in the network is your number one goal here. You'll see that I have some of these in red, and in network security, I have TLS 1.2 encryption in red. And I'm going to go into more detail about that in some upcoming slides on why I have that one as red. There's a new, well, I should say new, there's an old type of attack vector called man in the middle that is resurfacing recently, especially in the Northeast. And they're having great success. And in every case, they were not using the TLS 1.2 encryption. And if they were, it would pretty much prevented that attack. So we're going to touch base on that, and I'll show you what we can do there. The second phase is the ATM software itself. This is probably one of the most targeted attack vectors when anybody's going after software for a malware attack or anything in that aspect of attacking an ATM. And it's imperative that your institution is using some type of software security suite. And that includes getting the Microsoft security patches, the ATM manufacturer vendors patches, and the XFS layer patches as they come up and are vetted by the ATM providers to see what the impact is on their software stack that lives on the ATM. Just a little side note, if you're not doing that, you are not in PCI compliance, because getting those Windows patches and making sure that you have a solution in place with patches like that is a PCI requirement. So just keep that in mind. From the software standpoint, what we tell people to do is lock down that application, make it a gold image. Don't keep the common image that's out there for everybody, because once they know that, they know how to get around it. So in our case, when we provide these services to a client, we lock down our gold image and we make it unique to the Fiserv clients themselves. Included in that gold image is a whitelisting application. I won't go into details on what we use, but there are whitelisting applications out there, such as SolidCore and others, that will sit on the ATM and will only allow the applications or executables to run that are identified in the whitelisting map. So whitelisting is a definite do. I'm guessing it's going to be an actual requirement. It's a recommendation today, but it's going to be soon become a requirement from the PCI standpoint. Malware firewall protection. So you need to come up with some kind you need to run some type of antivirus firewall protection on your ATM software stack. to prevent anybody from trying to interject a malware or get into the actual stack itself. Again, this is another piece that we would provide to the client. There are others out there to do this. Let me give you an example. NCR, as an example, would roll out McAfee as their antivirus firewall and SolidCore as their whitelisting application. So that would be the whitelisting and malware and firewall protection that they would provide to you if you were to pay NCR to do these services for you. Patching. Once a month, Windows, for those of you that don't know, maybe you do, and I hope most do, ATMs today are supposed to be running on Windows 10, and I say supposed to be, because there's a lot of institutions out there that are not running on Win 10. They're still running on Win 7. As another side note, if you're still on Win 7, you are not PCI compliant. You must be on Win 10. And Windows will put out patches every month for security holes that they find within their applications that might live within Windows. Now, if you look at these patches from the Windows perspective, you're going to see patches for Excel, you're going to see patches for Word, Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, things like that, right? So there's a pretty good chance that some of these patches don't even apply to the ATM itself, because the ATM, while it might have Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge running on it, because that's how they display the screens, is using a solution like that. Internet Explorer is an example. But they don't run Excel, they don't run Word, or any of those other applications you might find in Office. So what they'll do is the vendors themselves take all these recommended patches from the Windows and Microsoft, and they make a list of what actually applies to their software stack, and then they vet out those changes, test them, and then they'll notify clients like us, Fiserv, FIS, and others, and say, okay, here are your patches for the month of February 2023. And then it's our responsibility at that time, or yours, if you're doing the security on the ATM, to take those recommended patches, test them, and deploy them to your ATMs to make sure they're in place for the changes that were sent on. Patching usually happens for us on a quarterly basis. Monthly was just too aggressive, and we struggled at best to have them done monthly. So we moved to a quarterly patching perspective. So every quarter, we'll send patches to an ATM, all our ATMs that are in our program, as a matter of fact. And it's not like we send it all down once and crowbar everything. We trickle everything down, and then we launch them at different times too. So it's not like every ATM is going to reboot at the same time. So once you get them set down and launch those patches, then you're good till the next cycle. There are things such as day of patches or critical patches that might come out, and Microsoft will say, you got to send this down like yesterday. It has to go immediately because it's a vulnerability that is, needs immediate attention. So when we get the critical or day of events like that, we'll work closely with the vendor, and we'll drop everything that's in the pipeline as far as patching goes for the quarterly aspect. We'll put that aside, and we'll do a day of patching and get that certified and moved on to the ATMs. In our case, we use a remote distribution product to send all that done. Some institutions will do SneakerNet, but we do a remote deployment with our solution in place. So critical gets immediate attention. Moving on to, I'm sorry, I want to take a step back again. In addition to the Windows patches, you also have to fit into this cycle critical security patches or just general release patches from the ATM vendors that might have things in them that improve performance, eliminate other issues that they've found in the past, things like that. And then on top of that would be the XFS layer. I have a slide that I'm going to show you toward the end of the presentation that shows you how the software stack's built, and I'll explain to you the layers and what's sitting on what top of what, so on and so forth, in regards to how the software stack is built in the ATM. Access controls and bias controls. So from the access controls perspective, you want to make sure that your USB ports are locked on, that only known personnel with a valid token or dongle can get into those USB ports for servicing. We do have a process in place that if somebody wants to service something, they would have to call into our 24/7 line, request access, and then we would give them a temporary passcode to get into that ATM to perform the services they needed from the software perspective. Because from the gold image perspective, they can't really get into Windows or anything like that until we give them that access through this token, if that makes sense to you. So make sure you have access controls in place on who has the ability to inject or put in a USB port or drive, things like that. Who knows the BIOS controls? Who knows the BIOS passwords? So you have to keep that all close in hand and make sure you track that. And auditors love that stuff. So if you're going to do it, you must do it right and keep a log with your auditors, and they'll give you a star for the day. On the last box is the physical security. Card skimming for sure still remains #1 attack vector on the ATM side. I'm going to show you some of the types of skimmers they're using today, what the newer threats are, because every time we try to come up with a solution to prevent skimming, when we think we got it, these guys just outsmart us again, and we're on to the next one. So we're more defensive than anything here, being reactive more than proactive. I will be talking about a new solution that some of the vendors are coming up with. I can't get into it in great detail because of confidentiality, but in this particular case, it is a solution where we're being proactive instead of reactive. Hook and chain, pretty prominent in the Midwest, pretty prominent down in the Atlanta area. So in this particular case, what they do is basically open up the plastic front or fascia of the ATM and put a chain around the vault holes and just pull the damn thing right off the pad, and down the street it goes. And they either burn it open or whatever the case might be to try to get the cash out of the ATMs themselves. So hook and chain is becoming more prominent than the older days. I'm going to show you some solutions in the next couple slides that help prevent hook and chain. But I'm here to tell you, no matter what anybody tells you and what solutions you see, if they want that ATM bad enough, it's coming with them, period. You're not going to stop them. The next one is the black box man-in-the-middle attack. As I alluded to earlier, we're seeing a high rise of these occur in the Northeast now. In most cases, it's exposed Cat5 wiring. The institutions or credit unions did not protect or hide the Cat5 cabling. They left it wide open so that anybody could just step up and plug in their black box and pretty much spoof Fiserv, where the ATM thinks it's talking to Fiserv and it's not. It thinks that if Fiserv is approving those transactions, it's not. The black box is. So before we know it, they're draining that ATM with all your money, and then away they go. And it's going to look to the ATM itself like it's talking to the Fiserv and getting all these approvals, and it's not. So black and box is a nasty one. But this is where that TLS 1.2 comes into play. If you are using TLS 1.2 encryption, that is encryption of the message itself, all the way from the ATM application, all the way down to the application of choice for beverages, whether it be, water, whatever the case might be. But anyhow, um, the access controls and the cardholder environment are also important too. And I'm sorry, I got interrupted there. So I'm going to show you the black box in a minute too. Sorry about that.
You're good.
Cardholder environment, making sure that the area around the ATM is well lit, stands up to all your ADA mandates, all your physical mandates that are put out there. People don't like to go to dark ATMs, right? So make sure that the ATM is a well-lit environment. It's in a secure location. And you know, that's kind of a feel-good thing where you're using the ATM and you feel good about walking up to the ATM. I'm going to talk about lobby-controlled ATMs when we talk about skimming, because a lot of people are going to lobby-controlled ATMs where you have to access the lobby using your debit or credit card to get in. And I'm going to show you some protection you're probably going to have to you're probably going to want to need when we talk about that too. So those are kind of the three pillars that I wanted to talk about on ATM security itself. Before we move on, any questions here?
We'll keep going here. Okay.
Go ahead. The next slide is the card skimming and mitigation. When I first started in the business, card skimming was the far left surface cover based skimmer. And these guys are good. They make the paint scheme and everything look exactly like the ATM itself. They embed the skimmer in the slot. So as the card slides through the slot, it's getting skimmed as it actually goes into the ATM card reader itself. Certain manufacturers started putting out solutions to mitigate that with technology that would see or be able to detect that there was something covering the actual card reader itself, and it would either shut down the ATM or trigger an alarm. False positives were through the roof. And I'm here to tell you, anything we talk about here in all these mitigation attempts for eliminating skimming, false positives are going to exist. So you have to make the choice whether you want to live with the false positives or do you want to put your brand at risk and not have any false positives. I lean toward deal with false positives. You don't want to be on the news for the institution that got hit for the skimming event at the local gas station or whatever the case might be. So when the ATM vendors came out with solutions to help mitigate against surface-based attacks, they went to what we call a deep insert, which is the second picture. And the deep insert skimmer is basically something they slide right into the card reader itself. It's very thin and it sits in there and lays in there. So as the card comes in, as it would normally, it would just ride right over top of the read head and then back out. It's practically non-detectable because you don't know what's in there unless you're a technician and you're in there looking at something and you say, what the heck is that? That's not part of our normal card reader. So we've had instances where we've sent technicians out for a potential skimming alert, never found the deep insert skimmer in the ATM itself, and said everything was fine. And lo and behold, when they went back again, the deep insert skimmer was fine. The third one in the middle is the latest and greatest. They knew that the deep insert plates and the deep insert protections that were being put in place by the ATM vendors were hampering their business. So they went to what we call an ultra thin now. And an ultra thin is anywhere between 5 mil to 6 mils in thickness versus the deep insert was about 8 or 9. So they cut almost in half the thickness, and they'll slip this in and it lays into the card reader itself, just like the deep insert one, but it's much thinner and it gets around the protection plates that were being put in to prevent the deep insert from getting inserted into the card reader and embedded. They went to the ultra thin, and it goes right past that deep insert protection plate. So they're constantly outsmarting us, right? So that's what I was referring to before when you're reactive versus being proactive. I'm going to come back and follow up on a couple comments here in a minute. The one to the right, this thin shimmer, is basically the same thing as the ultra thin for the read head. But in this particular case, if you look at the device itself, it's not going after the read head for the mag stripe, it's going after the EMV contacts. So they're trying to actually intercept any EMV traffic between the card and the ATM itself, as opposed to the three skimmers on the left are all reading the mag stripe on the back of the card. And for you mag stripe haters out there, I'm hearing that 2028 is going to be the beginning of the end of mag stripe. We've heard that for 20 years. I've heard it. So, you know, I'll believe it when I see it. But there's supposed to be an end of life coming for mag stripe. Let's just hope it gets here. Before I make my other comments, on the far right is a picture of a lobby door key access. This is where you would go up to, the ATM would sit in the lobby, and you would have to either slide or insert your debit or credit card into that card reader, and it would unlock the door for you to allow you to get in. So these guys know that now, and instead of skimming the ATM itself, they're putting the skimmers onto this card reader that sits outside the door, knowing that you got to either slide or insert your card to get into that lobby. So they're taking your track 2 data right from there. They're not even worried about you getting to the ATM. They're stealing it right there in front of you, and you don't even know it. So those of you that have lobby access door card readers, make sure you're doing frequent inspections of those as well, and potentially talk to your card reader provider and see if they have any tools or resources you can use to help prevent skimming on that card reader itself as well. For your information, you have third-party vendors, and each individual manufacturer will make solutions to help combat skimming. So you want to reach out to your ATM hardware provider to see what they have, or you can reach out to third-party solutions such as Synox or TMD. If you are in a managed services agreement with somebody like Fiserv as an example, we will bring to the table solutions that we offer as part of that service as well. So, you know, your choices are vendors, third-party solutions, or you reach out to your managed service provider, or if you're interested in managed services, reach out and get quotes from different parties that offer managed services, such as Fiserv, NCR, Cardtronic. Well, NCR and Cardtronic, same thing now. FIS.
More importantly, Members ATM Alliance.
Yeah, right. Turn on your alerts. You can get alerts from Fiserv. So the ATM has the ability, depending on what kind of anti-skimming solution you're using, of sending an alert down to Fiserv, and Fiserv can notify you of the potential event that might be happening, for you to go out there and immediately inspect it, immediately call the police, whatever the case might be. I hesitate against immediately calling the police because, as I said earlier, the false positives are very high. So you want to make sure you're not sending that police out there for every false positive. So just be careful there. We do recommend frequent inspections. Train your employees. Make them look for what they want to look for, not just on the outside, but on the inside too. So when they're in there, maybe clearing their card capture bin, if you're still using them, make sure they peek around there and they don't see anything obvious in the card reader. And stay informed. Always work with your provider, your business partners. Fiserv is an example. sit down with them, ask them, what are you seeing today? What can we do to be better? What can I do to be more safe and secure? And we'll be more than happy to sit down with anybody and tell them this is where we're going and this is what we gotta see, and so on and so forth. Educate your card holders. Make sure they don't see anything obvious. Gas pumps is an example. I used to tell my wife, before you stick that gas pump card in there, touch that card reader and see if it's loose or anything. And if it is, don't touch it. And don't let those little stickers fool you. The ones that say last inspected February 23rd, whatever the case might be. These guys make their own stickers, so they'll know exactly what the sticker looks like. They'll go in and put the skimmer on, and then they'll put their own sticker back on, so you think that it isn't broken. So that's about it for skimming. Any questions on skimming? By the way, average skimming dollar a month per hit last year was roughly $127,000. So for every event that was happening, the average came in as $127,000.
Yeah, the amount of follow-up work and reporting that goes into it as well. I mean, it's a real pain. It's a real problem. And, in my time down here in Georgia, working with credit unions, we have seen both the surface cover, we've seen one deep insert. So it's out there. And, there's plenty of videos that you can find online, YouTube or whatever, where people have taken videos of different types of surface covers. And so you can see that they make them, as identical as possible so that you can't easily tell at all. And like Paul mentioned, in terms of, some cardholder education, it's definitely good to, do the wiggle on the card reader. But you can see that with some of these other ones like deep insert and ultra thin, I mean, you can wiggle it all day long and you're never going to know. So it's really going to be a multi-tiered approach that's going to be your best effective deterrent that you can put out there to help keep your card holders and your ATM safe.
Yep. Just one comment about the look and feel. The paint that's used by the ATM vendors on the gray on the NCR, as an example, is patented and proprietary. So you can't go into a Home Depot and ask for that color scheme. They can't do it. It's not not legal to do that. But these guys are so good; they just get those colors so close. It's unbelievable, right? So they're very talented at what they do.
Yeah.
Okay, move on. This is the hook and chain. The one on the ATM on the left was recent. This was right before Thanksgiving in the Midwest. The arrow points to where the ATM used to be. They hooked and chained this, dragged it across the parkway and parking lot, I should say. And they got interrupted. The police were showing up, so they just kind of booked. They did get caught. So, but I just wanted to give you an example of, that ATM's not light. They just ripped that thing right off the pad and dragged it as far as they got, and then they let it go. The middle is showing you a protection beam, we call it, that you can install. It is keyed and gatewayed, so you can swing that away if you need to get in there and service the ATM. So there is some protection there. Not sure how much that's going to prevent people from stealing it, but they do offer those services where you can buy them and install them. And then the most aggressive that we find being used are the one to the right, which is a new methodology of bolting down the ATMs to the pad themselves, and how it would go into the pad and get into the bolt down to the ATM. So that thing on the right is actually partially covered by cement when it's installed. So it's a pretty aggressive methodology of bolting that ATM down to the pad itself. There's also solutions out there for upgrading the vault. So the NCR one model was known for being the most volatile in regards to hook and chain. And NCR has come out with vault upgrades to help protect against that. So if you are using the models that were more susceptible to the hook and chain than the others, you definitely want to talk to your provider and get the upgrades for the vault, and make sure that you don't give these thieves an easy opportunity to pull that thing right off. We talked about installing enhanced anchoring and cache degradation services. So we do have institutions out there today that are using cassettes filled with ink that if they are taken by force, it'll basically spray the whole cassette for all the cache. Obviously the cache is ruined, but it's going to render them taking pretty much nothing but ink stained money home and not being able to spend it. So it is a solution that's out there that people consider. It's your choice. There are many solutions out there that we could come and talk to you about too, including the other solutions from Cenox and TMD. All those companies we talked about for third party for anti-skimming also play in this arena tier 2, where they'll offer you services for hook and chain prevention as well. Questions on hook and chain? Nope. Okay, let's move on.
Before we move on, Paul, I'm just going to interject a little bit of my experience. So in the past, roughly about 2 years, we have seen a very large uptick in this type of attacks. Unfortunately, I've had the very dubious pleasure of dealing with this and getting those, 2 and 4 a.m. phone calls, dealing with the police and the credit union. We've had it happen, I want to say about a dozen times in the last 2 years. This is specific to the state of Georgia at the time that it was happening. And there's a very specific way that these folks do it. In each case, they generally steal a pickup truck, and they're usually picking kind of a particular year and model just because of the way that Ford was manufacturing the frame at the time. And when they show up, it doesn't take them very long at all. They'll back right up to the ATM. So there's different ways that you can help position the ATM and the access that a vehicle can back up to it. And they'll get out, they'll feed that chain down into the ATM because they can just pry open the fascia door. It doesn't take them more than really just 5 seconds. And then they get back in the truck and they go forward. Now, in this case, what we're advocating for is some extra anchoring down into the concrete. If not, then that ATM is going to come off. Now, oddly, we had a kind of a mixed bag of experience here, where if the ATM did not come off the pad, then generally the safe door would give and it would open up, and then they were able to access the cash. Now, on the flip side of that, if the anchoring did give way, then the ATM would come off the pad. And in each of those instances, the thieves, they weren't able to access they weren't able to get into the safe. They drugged the ATM around the parking lot, which, obviously is quite a spectacle, but they never got into the safe. But in every scenario, the ATM has always been damaged beyond repair because the structural integrity was compromised, and we've had to replace it. So I highly recommend using the security gate to help prevent against this attack, along with the upgrading the vault, the safe slot that Paul was mentioning. And the security gate, I'm not going to tell you that's 100% effective whatsoever, but it does offer protection. We recently had an attack about 2 months ago that the gate actually prevented them from accessing the safe. You can do some extra branding with it, but what it's really doing more than anything is identifying that your ATM at your location is not what we would call a soft target. There's a visual deterrent in place there that hopefully will discourage them from even making the attempt. But highly recommend it. And if you have a drive-up island type ATM, you should make sure that you take a look at that, because they are out there, and when they're successful, or even when they're not successful, the entire attempt is maybe a 2 to 3 minute ordeal at the most. So anyway, I just wanted to put out my experience on that, and I'll go ahead and advance it here.
I think your comment on deterrence is spot on. I think we're running out of time, so I better hurry up. I'm sorry, Kyle.
Oh, it's okay. Go ahead.
The black box man in the middle attack, this is how it's done. So let's focus on the middle picture first. This is a lobby ATM that was up in the Northeast somewhere. And you can see the wiring was not secured at all. It was just hanging there. So what they basically do is they take this black box to the right, they put the intelligence in it to make it simulate that it's Fiserv talking to the ATM. They patch in the box, they patch it back into Fiserv, so that from the telco perspective, I'm still passing keep alives to the box and to Fiserv in this particular case is an example. So it doesn't, we don't get a no communications alarm, if that makes sense to you, because that would trip a fault call, right? So they put this box in, and now what it's doing is it's talking to the ATM itself, and it's pretty much emulating Fiserv saying approving every transaction. So they could be standing there with a card that hasn't been used in 20 years that they've pre-coded in that black box, and they'll just drain that ATM transaction over transaction over transaction. And in most cases, they know, for NCR as an example, the maximum is $800. It's the 40 bill count by 20 as an example, $800. They'll just keep doing $800 transactions over and over. And then when they get their fill, or they're getting suspicious that they're getting caught, or somebody's eyeing them up, then they walk out. They leave the box there and everything. So that is a black box attack. The implementation of TLS 1.2 is really critical here, because it doesn't matter if they plug a box in or not. If you're doing TLS 1.2, that ATM has to be talking to Fiserv for it to work, because now the encryption keys are passed. And I'm not talking about the EPP PIN encryption keys. I'm talking about the communication encryption keys between the ATM application and Fiserv. They have to know each other to communicate properly with each other. So if he plugs that box in and they're using TLS 1.2, that ATM is not going to understand a damn thing that black box is telling him what to do, with the only exception being if it's an inside job and they have access to the certificate keys that are being used for TLS 1.2, and that's not going to happen too often. So that's why TLS 1.2 is so critical. And most people will say, well, I'm secure from router to router. It doesn't matter if you're router to router. That last mile between where that cable plugs into the router and into the ATM, as you can see in this picture, is where the attack takes place. So it has to be application to application. NCR's After Edge is an example, all the way back to Fiserv's Epic application. So again, if you're not using TLS 1.2 today, you need to seriously consider using that to help prevent attacks from your ATM. Questions on black box man in the middle? Okay.
I just wanted to chime in on this one as well, Paul, and just say that, I know you mentioned that these would be more like a lobby, but there's a lot of institutions that may also have offsite ATMs, maybe at a grocery store or a shopping center. And those are probably going to be equally or maybe even higher potential targets. So it's really important that you're taking these extra steps, you're blocking the access, and that you are using the TLS 1.2.
Yep. Good point. So from the ATM software perspective, these are majority of your attack vectors. We talked about network intrusion, US bank intrusion, physical intrusion, host spoofing, hard drive encryption we haven't talked about much yet, and I'm going to elaborate on that in a second. Operating system intrusion, those are the patches we talk about. It's a vendor application and XFS layer. As you piece this all together and you go to your gold image and all the protections that we're going to talk about, this is what you're protecting against, including hard drive intrusion or encryption. So what they do is, before we started using hard drive encryption, they would take the hard drive, they would shut an ATM down, they would take the hard drive out of the ATM. And by doing that, they had a way to go in and physically defeat the whitelisting application and put their own malware on there, put everything back together again. So when that ATM fired up on that hard drive, that malware was embedded in there in the process because they were able to get around it when they pulled the hard drive. If you encrypt that hard drive, they're not going to be able to do that. So that's why hard drive encryption is becoming fast a recommendation from the PCI industry to be put in place. And we do that today, and it's a good solution, and it's going to prevent attacks like this. Next, please. So these are your mitigation events. So you make sure you secure your ATM software environment with a full software security suite. That means antivirus, malware, whitelisting, TLS 1.2 for the communications, things like that. Encrypt the hard drive. Make sure that whoever you're using to drive your ATMs is PCI compliant, secure from the transaction processing environment, please. All your compliance is in place. Make sure you have access protection in place for USB ports. Things we talked about during this presentation are very much summing this up right here and telling you what you've got to make sure you have in place to protect yourself. Next, please. This is a picture of the software security suite. So if you forget about the orange and the pink to the left and just focus on the blues in the right, at the base layer of your ATM, you have the operating system, which is Win 10. Above that is the XFS layer. And for those of you that don't know what XFS layer is the translation solution that talks between the hardware devices and the ATM's vendor's application. So the ATM vendor application might not know how to talk to a Sanyo card reader. Sanyo is a company that makes card readers. So what the ATM ministry did is they built these XFS standards that will work with any kind of card reader. And no matter what kind of card reader is installed in your ATM, the XFS layer will be able to translate that communication path to the ATM vendor's application. So think of it as a translator more than anything. But it does have security holes in it. And that's why I mentioned earlier, if there are XFS layer patches that have to be deployed, we will deploy them for you and you sure that you're doing it yourself. So above the XFS layer is the vendor application, and then above that would be all your operating agents. And when we talk about operating agents, we might be talking about Diebold SCO for deposit automation, Jack Henry's incentive for deposit automation, Checkout for deposit automation. If you're using any kind of e-receipt activities, marketing campaigns, marketing tools, marketing remote deployment solutions.
Yeah, even monitoring
like,
agents. Yeah, even monitoring agents.
Yeah, exactly. Those all live on top of the ATM application. To the left is the far left is your software security suite that's kind of policing all this with your intrusion protections, your integrity protection, your access protection, and your hard drive encryption. So you could see that the importance of the software security suite is making sure that everything to the right is secure and working the way it should be, and there's no rogue agents or malware or anything over there that's going to run rampant. That's all being controlled by your software security suite. So if you have ATMs today, it's imperative that you're running software security on those ATMs. If not, you're very vulnerable, and these guys will find out who you are, and they're going to come knocking and attack you. And I think that's it. I think I ran in my limit here. Yep, I did. Sorry, Kyle.
This was great information, Paul. I guess kind of my last parting comment here would be just how comprehensive it is. And I'll just focus on the software side of this. So unless you're an institution that has a lot of extra resources, you can see that it probably just makes a lot of sense to find a partner that can handle this for you. And he mentioned several of them, but I'll tip my hat in the ring and just say that Members ATM Alliance, in conjunction with Fiserv and or NCR, we can provide these types of services. And that way you don't have the burden of trying to not just have a effective solution in place, but to maintain it. And it's really where the maintenance comes in, is where you have to stay busy on it, whether that's monthly or quarterly patches. And at the very start of the webinar, Paul mentioned that this game is always kind of a leapfrog. Who's ahead right now? Is it the bad guys or is it us? Because you always want to try to do your best to stay ahead of them, but they are diligently working right now to figure out how to sidestep what we've put in place. So, with that, we've reached the conclusion of our webinar. I'd like to take just a second and again, thank Paul for his time and participation. You're very knowledgeable, sir. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, feel free to shoot them, over to Leverage, and we'll make sure they get to him and he can respond to you directly. But if there's any, last minute questions here, if anybody has one, feel free to pop it into the Q&A spot and we'll do our best to answer it for you.
While we're waiting, I'm sorry for the interruption before. It kind of threw me off. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Life happens.
All I'll say is
I'm not seeing any questions here, Paul, in the Q&A or in the chat. So with that, I'd like to just thank everybody again for participating, and we look forward to seeing you at future Learning with Leverage webinars. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, guys.